The headline reads, "Simple enough. US B-2 bomber drops a 30,000-pound bunker buster on an Iranian missile factory." It's the kind of sentence that spreads fast, because every word in it sounds dramatic and specific at the same time. But specific claims deserve specific verification, and when you actually trace this exact weapon, the B-2, the 30,000-pound bomb, every confirmed instance of it being used against Iran, the word factory never actually shows up in the verified reporting. What does show up is something arguably more significant and considerably stranger. Stay with me, because getting this exactly right matters more than getting it exciting. Let's start with the weapon itself, because understanding exactly what this bomb is and isn't capable of is the foundation for everything else in this story. According to multiple defense outlets, the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator weighs approximately 30,000 pounds, close to 13,600 kilograms, and is designed specifically to penetrate up to 200 feet underground before detonating, cutting through layers of rock and reinforced concrete rather than exploding on impact the way a conventional bomb does. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, defeating deeply buried targets like this requires a bomb built with thick, hardened steel casing specifically designed to survive the shock and pressure of punching through that much rock, paired with a specialized fuse engineered not to detonate prematurely under that exact stress. The bomb measures roughly 20.5 feet long, with a diameter of about 31.5 inches. And here's the detail that matters most for tracking exactly where this weapon has actually been used. According to every major outlet covering it, the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber is the only aircraft in the American arsenal capable of carrying it, and each B-2 can carry a maximum of 2 at a time. So let's trace in order every confirmed instance of this specific bomb actually being dropped on Iran, because that record is the only thing that can tell us whether Missile Factory is an accurate description of anything that's actually happened. The first confirmed combat use of the GBU-57, anywhere, ever, happened on the night of June 21st into June 22nd, 2025, several months before this current war even began. According to the Department of Defense, 7 B-2 Spirit bombers flew from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri in a mission the Pentagon named Operation Midnight Hammer. According to Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Dan Kane, the mission used 14 GBU-57 bombs in total, with 12 dropped on the Fordo nuclear facility by 6 separate bombers, and 2 dropped on the Natanz nuclear facility by a 7th. According to reporting from Defense Industry Europe and multiple other outlets, a U.S. Navy submarine, the USS Georgia, separately launched more than 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles at surface infrastructure, connected to a third site, the Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center, meaning even Isfahan, one of the 3 targeted locations that night, was struck by Tomahawks, not by the GBU-57 itself. Read that list again: Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. Every single confirmed target of that historic first combat use of this weapon was a nuclear facility. Not one of them has ever been described in verified reporting as a missile factory. The mission profile itself is worth understanding in detail, because it shows just how much operational planning went into this specific strike, and how far removed it is from anything resembling a simple, single bomb drop story. According to Global Security, Org's detailed account of the operation, the bomber formation actually flew a deceptive route. A pair of B-2s initially took off toward Guam, a move explained publicly at the time in defensive terms, functioning as a diversion while the real 7-aircraft strike package instead flew the opposite direction, over the Atlantic, refueling multiple times during an 18-hour flight without ever landing. Advanced fighters, including F-22s and F-35s, swept ahead of the bomber formation into Iranian airspace, both identifying threats and potentially absorbing defensive fire that might otherwise have targeted the more valuable B-2s carrying the actual bunker buster payloads. According to that same account, at Fordo specifically, each of the 6 B-2s involved dropped 6 GBU-57s directly at the facility's 2 main ventilation shafts, with the attack sequence beginning by targeting the reinforced concrete covers protecting those shafts before subsequent bombs could punch deeper into the underlying structure. President Trump's own public description of the strike's outcome was about as absolute as language gets. According to reporting on his statement that night, he said the strikes had, in his words, wiped Iran's nuclear program off the face of the earth. That's an extraordinarily strong claim, and it's worth pausing on exactly how confidently it was delivered, because the actual assessment picture that followed was considerably less unanimous than that single sentence suggests. According to General Kane's own briefing the following day, initial battle damage assessments described the 3 targeted nuclear sites as having sustained what he called extremely severe damage and destruction. That's the official, on-the-record American military assessment delivered within a day of the strike. But according to a separate account published around that same period, the International Atomic Energy Agency reported no damage at Fordow specifically, a striking contradiction to the Pentagon's own initial characterization, and a reminder that even a strike this dramatic, using the most powerful conventional bomb in the American arsenal, produced genuinely disputed assessments of its actual effectiveness in the immediate aftermath. Whatever the true extent of the damage turned out to be once fuller assessments emerged, the point relevant to this video is simple. Even in its most famous, most thoroughly documented use, the GBU-57's target set was nuclear infrastructure, not missile production capacity. Let's go a little deeper on where this bomb actually came from, because its development history explains exactly why it exists in the first place, and why only Fordo-type targets were ever the intended use case. According to Defense Industry Europe, the GBU-57 was developed in the mid-2000s by the Air Force Research Laboratory and produced by Boeing, with its first test explosion conducted back on March 14, 2007, inside an underground tunnel at White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, under the supervision of the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. Further test drops followed between 2008 and 2010, using B-52 Stratofortress bombers at that same range, well before the weapon was ever paired specifically with the B-2 for operational use. According to that same reporting, the U.S. Air Force has ordered at least 20 of these bombs to date, a genuinely small production run for a weapon this expensive and this specialized, which tells you it was never designed as a mass-produced general-purpose munition. It was built from the very beginning for a narrow category of target, a handful of facilities around the world hardened and buried deeply enough that nothing else in the American arsenal could reach them, and Fordo specifically is worth understanding in more depth, because it's the facility that essentially justified this bomb's existence in the first place. According to Gulf News' reporting, Fordo is buried under roughly 300 feet of rock near the holy city of Qom, storing key centrifuges used for uranium enrichment, a facility so deeply protected that even Israel's own extensive bombing campaign against Iran's broader nuclear infrastructure was never able to reach it, because Israeli aircraft simply lack munitions heavy enough to penetrate that depth. According to that same reporting, Behnam Ben Taleblu, director of the Iran program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, said at the time that Iran's missile stockpiles, launchers, military bases, production facilities, nuclear scientists, and military command and control had all taken a very severe beating from the broader campaign, but that outsized questions remained about how effective any of it had actually been against, in his words, the beating heart of Iran's nuclear program specifically. That's a nuclear policy expert in real time, explicitly separating production facilities as one category among several being hit, distinct from the nuclear enrichment sites the GBU-57 was actually built to reach, the exact distinction this video has been tracing throughout. Now let's fast forward to this current war specifically, because the GBU-57 didn't stay retired after Operation Midnight Hammer. It came back into active use once fighting between the U.S. and Iran resumed in earnest. According to 1945's reporting from March of this year, as this war's early campaign, codenamed Operation Epic Fury, got underway, B-2 bombers, armed with both the GBU-57 and the smaller 5,000-pound GBU-28 bunker buster, began destroying what that outlet described as buried Iranian weapons facilities, underground ammunition depots, and hardened nuclear infrastructure. That's a broader target description than the original Midnight Hammer strikes. Weapons facilities and ammunition depots now sit alongside nuclear infrastructure in the target list. But notice the specific language still being used even in this more expansive description. Weapons facilities, ammunition depots, not, at this stage of the reporting, a missile factory specifically. The moment that most likely produced the headline this video is built around came several weeks later in early April. According to the Wall Street Journal, as reported by Army Recognition, B-2 Spirit stealth bombers struck an underground Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps compound in Tehran with GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrators as part of Operation Epic Fury. And this specific strike happened inside a genuinely remarkable, high-stakes operational context. It occurred during an active mission to rescue a downed American F-15E airman inside Iranian territory. According to that same Wall Street Journal reporting, American bombers dropped approximately 100 2,000-pound class bombs during that same recovery effort, specifically to prevent Iranian forces from converging on the area where the rescue was taking place. The B-2 strike on the underground IRGC compound appears, according to that reporting, to have formed part of a single, coordinated operational design, shielding the rescue corridor, disrupting Iranian troop movement, and exploiting a narrow window to strike a hardened command node tied to the IRGC's senior leadership, all at the same time. Let's spend a moment on the rescue operation itself, because it deserves more context than a single sentence about 100 bombs can provide. Based on a publicly documented account of the incident, the F-15E was shot down over Iran's Kogaluya and Boyar Ahmed province on April 3rd, triggering a 2-day combat search and rescue operation involving the Air Force's 427th Special Operations Squadron, Army Delta Force operators, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, and Navy Special Warfare units. Both crew members from that F-15E were ultimately rescued, but according to that same account, 3 IRGC members and 4 Iranian Army officers were killed during the rescue operation itself, and the U.S. reported an A-10 Thunderbolt and an MQ-9 Reaper lost to Iranian fire during that same stretch, alongside damage to 2 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters involved in the recovery. The B-2 strike on the underground IRGC command bunker in Tehran wasn't a standalone news event happening in isolation. It was one piece of an enormously complex, multi-domain rescue operation involving special operations, forces on the ground, helicopters taking fire, and a downed A-10 and Reaper drone, all unfolding across the same roughly 48-hour window. That's the actual scale and complexity the Missile Factory headline compresses down into a single, much simpler sentence. It's also worth walking through the precise timeline of the original Midnight Hammer raid, because the level of documented detail available for that specific mission shows just how much verifiable structure sits underneath even the most dramatic-sounding single-sentence summary. According to an account of the raid sequence, fighters reported overflights of the city of Shiraz at 1:14 a.m. local time on June 22nd, with reports of possible drones across various Iranian regions appearing just minutes earlier. New aircraft reports followed shortly after in Iran's central sector. That kind of minute-by-minute documentation, overflight reports, drone sightings, aircraft movements tracked almost in real time, is precisely the sort of granular, verifiable record that a simplified headline like B-2 drops bomb on missile factory strips away entirely, replacing an actual, traceable sequence of events with a single flattened claim. Let's be precise about what that target actually was, because this is the exact point where missile factory and the verified record part weighs most clearly. An underground IRGC command bunker is a facility built for leadership, coordination, and communications. The physical infrastructure senior commanders would use to direct forces, receive intelligence, and issue orders during exactly the kind of crisis a downed American airman deep inside Iranian territory would represent. That is a fundamentally different category of target from a missile factory, which would be a manufacturing and production facility. Assembly lines, machining equipment, propellant mixing, the physical infrastructure used to actually build new missiles rather than command existing forces. Destroying a command bunker degrades an enemy's ability to coordinate a response in a specific moment. Destroying a missile factory degrades an enemy's long-term capacity to replace weapons. It's already expended. Both are legitimate, significant military targets. They are not the same thing, and conflating them, even unintentionally, even through simple headline compression, changes what a viewer actually understands about what this specific strike accomplished. And this matters even more once you connect it to a separate, well-documented thread running throughout this entire war, the actual question of Iran's missile production capacity and how resilient it's turned out to be. According to satellite imagery analysis conducted by CNN and other outlets later in this war, several of Iran's underground missile storage sites, including facilities near Isfahan, Kermanshah, and Khomeini, that had been struck earlier in the conflict were subsequently found to have been reopened using nothing more sophisticated than bulldozers and dump trucks, with access roads recratered by strikes simply repaved afterward. According to that same reporting, U.S. intelligence estimates found that despite thousands of strikes across this war, roughly half of Iran's ballistic missile launchers remained intact months into the conflict. If Iran's actual missile production and launch infrastructure has proven this durable against repeated strikes throughout the war, then a headline suggesting a single B-2 mission destroyed an entire missile factory in one strike doesn't just risk being imprecise about one specific target. It risks giving viewers a fundamentally inflated sense of how close this war actually is to eliminating Iran's missile capability altogether, when the verified pattern elsewhere in this same conflict points in almost the opposite direction. It's worth remembering, too, just how large the total force package, supporting even the original Midnight Hammer strike actually was, because it puts the 7 headline-grabbing B-2s in their proper context. According to reporting on the operation, more than 125 aircraft were involved in that single mission overall. The 7 B-2s carrying the actual bunker buster payloads represented only a fraction of the total force, alongside EA-18 Growlers flying electronic warfare support and F-22s and F-35s providing fighter cover, exploiting corridors that had already been opened by Israel's own earlier bombing campaign, which had significantly weakened Iran's air defense shield in the weeks beforehand. Over 70 missiles and other munitions were used across the full operation. A headline built around a single bomber and a single bomb type, however accurate as far as it goes, necessarily leaves out the fact that neither the June 2025 strike nor the April 2026 strike This video as covered actually involved a lone aircraft acting in isolation. Both were the visible tip of a much larger, more complex joint operation. And it's worth understanding, honestly, why a detail like missile factory tends to spread, even when it isn't the most accurate available description. An underground IRGC command bunker is a real, significant newsworthy target, but for an audience without deep familiarity with military terminology, command bunker doesn't carry the same immediate visceral weight that missile factory does. A factory implies mass production, an assembly line, something tangible being built at scale. A command bunker requires an extra step of explanation to convey why it matters, that it's about coordination and leadership rather than physical weapons output. In a media environment that rewards the fastest, most immediately graspable version of a story, missile factory simply travels faster and further than underground IRGC command bunker used to coordinate a hostage rescue crisis, even though the second phrase is the one the verified reporting actually supports. So where does that leave the actual accurate version of the story? Here's what's genuinely confirmed, laid out plainly. The GBU-57 has been used in combat against Iran on at least 2 separate documented occasions. The first, in June 2025, targeted Iran's Fordo and Natanz nuclear facilities specifically, with disputed initial assessments of the actual damage achieved. The second, in April 2026, targeted an underground IRGC command bunker in Tehran, as part of a coordinated operation that also involved roughly 100 additional bombs dropped to protect the rescue of a downed American airman. A broader campaign of B-2 strikes throughout March 2026, described more generally as targeting weapons facilities, ammunition depots, and nuclear infrastructure, ran alongside those 2 more specific, individually documented strikes. At no point in any of that verified reporting does a confirmed named missile factory appear as the target of a GBU-57 strike. That doesn't mean Iran's missile production facilities have never been struck by anything in this war. It means the specific pairing this video's title describes, a B-2 dropping this specific 30,000-pound bomb on a facility specifically identified as a missile factory, isn't something the available, named reporting actually confirms happened. Let's talk about why this kind of precision actually matters, beyond just getting a single fact right for its own sake. This war has produced an enormous amount of genuinely dramatic, confirmed footage and reporting, real strikes, real damage, real consequences on every side. When a headline compresses underground IRGC command bunker into missile factory, it isn't making the story less true by exaggeration alone. It's making it a different story. A missile factory headline implies a direct hit against Iran's capacity to build more weapons. A command bunker strike is a hit against Iran's capacity to coordinate its existing forces during a specific crisis. Viewers who walk away believing the first version have a meaningfully different, less accurate picture of what this specific weapon has actually accomplished in this war than viewers who understand the second verified version. Every specific claim in this video traces back to a named, checkable source. The Center for Strategic and International Studies' technical explanation of the GBU-57's design and capabilities, the Department of Defense's and General Dan Kane's own briefings on Operation Midnight Hammer, including the 14 bombs dropped across Fordo and Natanz, and the Tomahawk strikes on Isfahan, global security. Org's detailed account of the mission's deceptive routing and fighter escort, reporting on the disputed damage assessments between the Pentagon's initial characterization and the International Atomic Energy Agency's separate reporting on Fordo. Specifically, 1945's, reporting on the broader March 2026 B-2 campaign during Operation Epic Fury, the Wall Street Journal's reporting, as covered by Army recognition. COM on the April 2026 strike on the underground IRGC command bunker in Tehran and its connection to the F-15E airman rescue operation. And CNN's reporting on the later, separate pattern of Iran reopening bomb tunnel entrances at other underground missile sites throughout the war. Wherever a specific claim, like the true extent of the damage at Fordo, or whether any confirmed strike has specifically targeted a missile production facility rather than a command or storage site, remains genuinely disputed or unconfirmed in available reporting, that uncertainty has been stated directly rather than resolved into a cleaner, more dramatic version than the facts support. There's one more thread worth tying off before we close, because the disputed damage assessment from Fordo deserves a fuller resolution than simply noting that officials disagreed in the immediate aftermath. Initial battle damage assessments are, by their nature, produced under enormous time pressure, often relying on satellite imagery and preliminary sensor data, rather than the kind of on-the-ground or fuller technical verification that takes weeks or months to assemble. A gap between a same-day Pentagon assessment describing severe damage and a slightly later international assessment reporting no visible damage isn't necessarily evidence that either side was being dishonest. It's often simply evidence of how differently damage can be defined and detected depending on what kind of verification method is actually being used, and how much time has passed since the strike itself. Surface-level satellite imagery can miss internal structural damage entirely, while ground-level or sensor-based verification of an enrichment facility's actual internal condition can take considerably longer to establish with confidence. That gap between initial claims and fuller verification is a pattern worth watching for throughout the rest of this war too. Not just in this one instance. The first assessment released after any major strike is rarely the final complete word on what actually happened. And it's worth acknowledging directly that this kind of correction cuts in both directions, not just toward making a story less dramatic. Getting the target right, command bunker instead of missile factory, doesn't diminish what actually happened on either occasion this video has covered. If anything, understanding that the April strike happened in the middle of an active combat search and rescue operation, with special operations forces on the ground and helicopters taking fire, makes it a more compelling, more human story than a simple bomb hits factory headline ever could. The real version has actual stakes attached to it. 2 American aircrew members whose survival depended in part on that specific strike successfully disrupting Iranian coordination at exactly the right moment. That's a genuinely gripping story on its own merits, without needing an inflated target description to make it land. So here's what I'd leave you with. The B-2 Spirit really has dropped 30,000-pound bunker busters on Iranian targets more than once, in strikes that were genuinely among the most significant military operations of this entire war. That part of the headline is true, confirmed, and remarkable on its own terms, without any need for exaggeration. But Missile Factory appears to be a detail that got attached to this story somewhere between the actual verified target, an underground IRGC command bunker hit during a rescue mission for a downed American pilot, and the version of the story that spreads fastest online. Getting that specific word right isn't a small correction. It's the difference between a war that's degraded Iran's ability to coordinate its forces during a single moment of crisis, and a war that's actually managed to destroy the physical infrastructure Iran depends on to keep building the missiles this entire conflict keeps circling back to. What do you think actually happened to whatever facility inspired this specific headline? A genuine mix-up between a command bunker and a production site, or a deliberate exaggeration designed to make an already remarkable strike sound even bigger than it was? Let me know what you think in the comments. And there's a broader habit worth naming before we close, because it extends well past this one bomb and this one war. Every time a piece of military hardware becomes genuinely famous, and the GBU-57 has, at this point, become about as famous as a bomb gets, with its own nickname, its own extensive technical coverage, its own dedicated news cycle every time it's used, that fame creates a kind of gravitational pull on unrelated stories. Once audiences know the name GBU-57 and understand roughly what it's capable of, any new underground strike involving a B-2 tends to get pulled into association with it, whether or not the specific weapon or target actually matches what happened before. That's likely part of how a real confirmed April 2026 strike on an IRGC command bunker ends up drifting, in less careful retellings, toward the more recognizable, more dramatic missile factory framing that this specific bomb has never actually been confirmed to hit. The lesson isn't just about this one headline. It's about how quickly a genuinely well-documented weapon system can become a kind of narrative shorthand, absorbing details from other stories, simply because it's the most famous name available to attach to any new underground strike that comes along. There's a practical lesson in here for how to watch coverage of the rest of this war going forward too, and it's worth stating plainly rather than leaving implied. Whenever you see a specific weapon system attached to a specific named target, a factory, a bunker, a storage site, a launch facility, the actual accuracy of that pairing usually traces back to just a handful of primary sources: a Pentagon briefing, a named defense outlet's reporting, a specific quote from a military official speaking on the record. When multiple outlets independently converge on the same specific target description, using the same specific terminology, that convergence is a genuinely strong signal the claim is accurate. When a claim can't be traced back to any of those primary sources, and instead seems to have simply attached itself to a famous weapon system because that weapon system already has an established, recognizable reputation, that's exactly the moment to slow down and ask where the specific detail actually came from. This video walked through that exact process for one specific headline. The same process, trace the weapon, trace the target, trace the primary source, works for any claim in this war or in any conflict, where a dramatic-sounding headline is doing more work than the underlying reporting can actually support. I'll be back the moment there's a confirmed update on any of this. Stay safe, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next video.